This tutorial covers how to calculate length of stay data. This topic is covered in your textbook on pages 553 to 555. The length of stay is something that is calculated for each patient after he or she is discharged from a facility, and it's actually the number of calendar days that a patient stays in the hospital from admission to discharge. It's used for utilization management as well as financial reporting. When we talk about utilization management, basically the length of stay can be used to look at whether or not patients are being kept at the appropriate level of care for the appropriate amount of time. It can also be used to compare lengths of stay between patients of different physicians. In other words, if two physicians have patients admitted with the same diagnosis, is the length of stay similar or somewhat longer or shorter for one or more physicians, and they can compare the treatments and trends and so forth. There are different terms that you may see used for length of stay. You may see it called discharge days, number of days of care provided to patients who were discharged, or days of stay. We're going to be looking at length of stay from three different perspectives. First, we'll look at length of stay when it's being calculated for one patient. Next, we'll look at calculating total length of stay, which would be a sum of the lengths of stay for all patients that are discharged during a certain period of time. And then last, we will look at the calculation of average length of stay, which is the total length of stay divided by the number of discharged patients. So it's actually just a basic average. And we'll look at examples of each of these as well. Okay, length of stay is the number of calendar days that the patient is in the hospital. A really important rule to remember when you're thinking about length of stay is that the day of admission counts in the length of stay, but the day of discharge does not. The day of discharge does not count in length of stay. The calculation or how you determine length of stay depends on the dates. If the patient's stay was all contained within 1 month, then you simply subtract the date of admission from the date of discharge. If their stay falls across more than 1 month, it becomes a two-step process. Step 1, you take the number of days that are in the admission month and subtract the date of admission, and then step 2, you add in the number of hospitalized days in the month of discharge. Now that's going to make a lot more sense when we put some actual patient numbers here. So let's look at some examples. Let's say that we have a patient who was admitted to the hospital on March the 5th and discharged on March 15th. Since the stay was contained during 1 month, we're going to take the date of discharge, March 15th, and subtract the date of admission, March 5th, which 15 minus 5 gives us a total of 10 days. And if you were actually just to count that out on the calendar, you would get that same total as long as you remembered to count the day of discharge, or excuse me, the day of admission, but not the day of discharge. Okay, when the stay crosses over more than 1 month, the first step is to take the number of days in the admission month and subtract out the date of admission. So again, another example, if we have a patient that was admitted on March the 5th, but this time wasn't discharged until April the 10th. So we need the number of days in the admission month. Well, and there are 31 days in March, so we're going to say March 31st minus the date of admission, March 5th. That gives us 26 days. And then step 2 is an addition problem. So we're going to add in the number of hospitalized days in their month of discharge. So we know that they were in the hospital from from April the 1st to April the 10th. So that gives us 10 days that they were in the hospital during April. So 26 plus 10 gives us 36. Now, to me, this can get a little bit confusing because I've focused on not counting that day of discharge as a part of the length of stay. And if you're just simply counting it out, that's right. When you're doing the stays that fall during 1 month, when you do the 15th minus the 5th, that calculation automatically disregards that day of discharge. But when you're using this next formula, when the stay falls across more than 1 month, don't get confused by trying to leave out the discharge day on step 2. And here's what I mean. For step 1, we took the number of days in the admission month, which was 31. So we said March 31 minus the admission date of March the 5th gave us 26 days. When we did that calculation, that already balanced us out or took away that day of discharge. So that's already been accounted for in that mathematic equation. So then when we say add the number of hospitalized days in the month of discharge, you want to count all of those days. So that's why I counted April the 1st through April the 10th, which gave me that total of 10 days. So basically I'm saying don't leave the day of discharge off when you're counting as part of this calculation the number of hospitalized days in the month of discharge. Hopefully that makes sense, but if not, just please let me know, send me an email or give me a call, and I'll do my best to explain it better. Okay, a few rules to remember about length of stay. One is that the days are not broken down into parts. In other words, if a patient is in care for 1 minute, for 1 hour on a specific day, then the whole day will be counted. A patient who is admitted and discharged on the same day will always have a length of stay of 1 day. So even though their stay could have been 2 hours, their length of stay will be equal to 1 day. A patient who is admitted 1 day and discharged the next also has a 1 day length of stay. So if they're admitted and discharged the same day or admitted 1 day and discharged the next, they will have a 1 day length of stay. Deaths and transfers also count as discharges. Last thing to remember, if February is given as one of the months that you're calculating length of stay for, you need to remember that in a leap year, February has 29 days instead of 28. And so if you were doing this in the real world, you would know whether or not the February that you were calculating for was a leap year. If you're working on a length of stay calculation on an assignment or an exam, if February is used, the exam or the instructions should specify whether or not it was a leap year. Okay, the next way that we're going to look at length of stay, that we've covered how to look at it for one patient. Now we're going to look at total length of stay, which this is a really easy one. It's just adding it up. It's the sum of days of stay for any group of patients discharged during a specific period of time. Like I said, it's easy to calculate. You just add up the lengths of, as long as you know the lengths of stay for each patient, you just add them up. And like so many of our statistics, adults and children are calculated separately from newborns. Okay, last is the average length of stay. And basically the average length of stay is the total length of stay for a given period divided by the number of discharges for that same time. So you're going to take whatever your total length of stay is that you've just added up and divide by the total number of discharges. So again, this is a simple average that you're probably used to computing. Adults and children are counted separately. And remember, when you're doing this one, I think sometimes it gets easy to always want to do that multiplying by 100, but this is not a rate. This is something different, and so don't multiply lengths of stay by 100 automatically. Okay, that is the end of this tutorial. Please let me know if you have any questions.